Hi, I'm Richard from Glowing Embers, and this is the second in a few-part series about the more technical side of installing a stove, specifically relating to Document J and the building regulations. So the building regulations really cover two things: the stove itself and the flue. The majority of it really actually revolves around the flue system, but we'll tackle it in two parts. We'll start with the stove side of things and then move on to the flue. So this video will be really just about the stove side of things. So in terms of a stove, beyond just what your manufacturer specifies about the stove in your manual, which is always important and in some cases does override the building regulations, the main things that the building regulations refer to are distance to combustibles. And that means how far away combustible materials can be from your wood-burning stove, which includes skirting boards, curtains. Plasterboard is considered a combustible material because it has a thin lining of paper on the outside of it, even if it's painted. And obviously wooden floorings, wood itself, of course, where you actually store your wood. So every stove has a distance to combustible rating, and it's something when they get tested that in the lab, they'll measure the heat that gets generated at the back and the rear of the stove, and you'll have a distance to combustibles rear and a distance to combustible side. And this is how far away the combustible material has to be from the sides and the rear of the stove. So if it's going into a fireplace, for instance, or next to a wall, and let's say the wall is brick, then there's no regulations about how close it can get, but you should leave at least a 50mm air gap around, ideally. If it's going into something where there's plasterboard or you've got a wooden surround or something like that, then the minimum distance to combustibles applies, and then you have to make sure you keep that distance away. And the second thing is hearths. Now a hearth is something that you sit your stove on. It's a non-combustible piece of material, and there are two types of hearths designated in the building regs, which is a constructional hearth and a non-constructional hearth, or a cool hearth rated hearth. So a constructional hearth is the standard thing which you would sit a stove on. It would probably be how your fireplace has been built if you're putting your stove in a fireplace, which is a thick concrete base with no combustible materials underneath. So strictly speaking, the actual regs, it's 125mm of concrete and a 50mm air gap before any combustible materials. And that is what you would need to put under a stove, unless the stove is what's called cool hearth rated. And that means that at those same tests we were talking about earlier, they also measured the temperature at the base of the stove. And if the base of the stove doesn't get above 100 degrees C when it's running, then you can put your stove on a 12mm hearth. So it's either called cool hearth rated or 12mm hearth rated. And that's where you see the stoves on just a piece of toughened glass, which is 12mm thick. Makes it a lot easier to install. You can literally put that on top of an existing flooring, such as a wood flooring, etc., and put your stove on top of that. But the stove has to be cool hearth rated for that. The other main piece of information that you need to know about a hearth is it needs to be at least 300mm in front of your stove. So when you open the door, embers are likely to come out. You need to have at least 300mm of non-combustible hearth in front of your stove. So those are the main considerations when putting in a stove. There are other things. Obviously, you need a CO alarm in the room. Carbon monoxide is deadly and odorous, and that's one of the hazards with a wood-burning stove. So you need a CO alarm in your room, and a notice plate needs to be put in the chimney at some point to tell the next person who comes there exactly what everything is in your chimney. Ventilation is another thing that's specified, and that basically means you've got to have enough airflow into your room that you've got your stove in to allow it to burn, because as it's burning, it's drawing air from your room to burn, drawing oxygen from your room to burn, and you've got to ensure you've got enough airflow. It also messes with how effectively the flue system works if you don't have enough of an inflow of air. So The regulations state that anything 5 kilowatts or under, you do not need ventilation for. So you don't need any extra ventilation in the room. Anything above 5 kilowatts, you're going to need to put an air brick in your room, which just allows extra ventilation in. Now there's this complex formula, which again we've got on our site, you can have a look, to tell you how big this needs to be, but the simplest way is we also sell ventilation kits. They're just like a 5-inch core cut hole which you need to put through, unobtrusive, and they're baffled, etc. So you can put those in. The other option to that though is you can get a stove which is direct air. So that would have to go on an external wall. So let's say this was an external wall. There would be a pipe that you'd cut, a core cut a hole through your wall again, but you could seal that pipe in and it draws all of the air from outside of your room into the stove, and then there's no need for ventilation. Your room can be completely sealed. It's not reliant on the air in your room at all for combustion. So those are the two options. And the last thing that's really in the building regs that we need to talk about here is the flue diameter, or the stove outlet diameter. So every stove comes with an outlet or a flue outlet, and it's a certain size. Whatever size that is, you cannot reduce beneath that. So 5 and 6 inch are the most common. If you've got a 5-inch stove, a stove with a 5-inch outlet, you cannot go down to 4 inches, but you can increase a diameter, and there are some reasons that might be good to do in some circumstances, but you can never decrease. So if you've got a stove with an 8-inch outlet and you can't get anything larger than a 6-inch flue up your chimney, then you just can't install that stove. You have to go for one which is smaller. So that really leads us on to the next thing, which is flue diameters, and we'll tackle that in the next video and do an in-depth dive into the different types of flue systems and all the regulations around those. But for now, if you found this useful, subscribe to our channel. That would be great. Give us a like. That would be very much appreciated. Any questions, comments, leave them in the comments below, and we'll see you in the next video.